Yeah, thank you for that, Priya. Yeah, again, my name is Michael. So some of you who already listened to our webinar before, our product manager and also application manager, or application engineering manager, I should say, Eric Mack, has been giving us quite useful presentations, mainly on the technical aspects of transceivers. And I think he needed some break. So he asked me to run a webinar. So as Priya mentioned, this is not a technical topic, but clearly the most frequent questions that I get in sales and marketing is, how much does it cost, right? How much is it? And as you know, that optical transceivers are so different based on the data rate and form factors. So I thought it would be just useful to at least focus on, let's say, 100 gig QSFP28 modules, and at least to give you some sense of the factors that go in, considerations, and some actual examples. So the answering your question on cost, so how much does it cost? Frankly, the simple answer is, the honest answer is, it depends, right? There are a lot of different factors that goes in, and while we wish we can give you one number for each transceiver, it's no, that's not really possible. But I do want to give you some sense of what factors goes into the cost of, say, typical 100 gig QSFP28 module. And there are direct factors, but there are clearly business considerations, external factors, and type of customers we are working with. So I'll be also discussing the other considerations that could affect the cost. And also that, definitely we want to give you some sense of actual cost examples. Okay. So as Priya mentioned, feel free to stop me or ask me questions through the Q&A, either during the middle of the presentation or at the end of the presentation. Okay. So let's dive right in. So, I mean, most of us has been working in the business, and whether optical transceivers, other optical modules, or consumer products or services, there are many different factors affecting the product you are selling or the services you are providing. For the optical modules, I mean, this is not quite correct in terms of a whole financial, I guess, model, but I thought it would be useful to break out a few of the key factors, at least that we consider at Vitex, and also that when I was at JDSU, the similar factors go into play, costing, optical modules like 100 gig QSFP28 modules, right? So first one is obviously, being this high technology product, there's an R&D involved. So I just simply call this engineering and development. So these are the engineers who design the parts, testing it, verifying it, and qualifying it. Over the years, the optical modules went through tremendous changes. So when we started a long time ago, it used to be really a lot of discrete work, a lot of manual work, and the volume used to tend to be much smaller than now. And way in the beginning, I mean, this is a long time ago, but back in the days, like AT&T can control everything, and they make all the electronic components, lasers, and it's truly vertically integrated, and they can make pretty much everything from scratch. But that was the beginning of fiber optic communications, probably at least 20, 25, 30 years ago. But gradually the optics changed, demand has grown, there are definitely more demand. But still, that it's not quite at the level of a semiconductor manufacturing, if I can make that comparison. Semiconductor the volume is much bigger. The manufacturing process is a lot more automated, and there are a lot more consumer market for semiconductor type applications. So fiber optics, as most of you know, it's still very technology driven, and it's really still B2B business. So engineering development plays a lot of a role, right? So there's And some of the key phases, I mean, this is not the only one, but as some of you can appreciate, there are some of the main the factors or the phases is like design verification and qualifications, making sure that the reliability, temperature cycling, storage, even the package drop test, all of the standard that you want to follow. So those are things definitely play a role in costing the expenses, yeah, for developing the module. And the second big factor is obviously the manufacturing part of it, or production. This, I think that we just pick a black diagram of, in this case, 100 gig LR4. So as you can see, I mean, this is a typical example, but if you open up the transceiver case, you'll see optics. These days, this is all packaged. So we call it the transmitter optical subassembly, TOSA. So that's the one that contains your lasers, and ROSA is on the detector that contains the photodiodes. And so, I mean, these are the main the parts that make up the transceivers: optics, TOSA, ROSA, and especially as we go into higher data rate like 100 gig, the controlling ICs play an important role. So signal conditioning, making sure that we are driving lasers correctly at a higher data rate, and they're all synchronized, looking at the clocks. So these are chipsets actually now becoming the probably more important or more expensive part of the transceivers, especially as the data rates go up, from 10 gig to 40, 100 gig, and 400 gig now. And now that even there's a development going on for 800 gig. So these are the materials and BOM cost. And for most of the transceiver manufacturers, there are very few vertically integrated companies left. And nobody really makes everything on their own these days. So clearly there is a big part of the cost. And of course, there's still assembly, alignment, testing, all those that involve the labor. So there's clearly the labor cost that goes in. And again, at the higher data rate, the testing becomes more important, and test equipment gets more expensive, right? So you want to test these properly, making sure that all the signal integrity is there, optical power is there. So testing equipment, testing time, all of that obviously becomes a major costing factor. And third part I mentioned here is I just put down yield. So that really, I think that I want to say that yield is really the function of the company manufacturing production line maturity and how well the process has been set up, right? So you could use the same materials, you could even use the exactly same design, but the process, and that's where the manufacturing know-how and operational excellence come into play. And clearly that, you want ideally 100% yield, so that, that all the things that you put into the initial phase of the production, hopefully everything will come out as 100% as a good output, which is in this case, optical modules. But, the 100% is impossible almost, but, you want to really get to like hopefully 99.9%. And making sure that all the your process is all well controlled, so that you get the highest yield possible. Of course, the better the yield, the lower the cost, right? So these are some of the more technical and direct cost factors that go into the module cost. So the next slide, I want to talk about the other factors or considerations that go into developing cost of an optical module. So I divided this into 3 different, I guess, categories. So one is what I call internal business considerations. So besides those direct costs, obviously every business has some kind of overhead expenses, some fixed cost. And as an example, that could be your factory, rent, your sales office, technical support personnel, your admin. So all of that obviously play into the product cost, and usually gets spread around. But there's definitely that overhead and fixed cost. And that's not just optical transceivers, of course. That's really the, I guess, the business principle that applies to everything. But also there's I just call it the financial target. So every company has a little different financial goals. So your desired profit margin, or maybe that you want to measure more of a gross profit or net profit. But every company has a slightly different target. Or sometimes that it's not that often, but some public companies may have quarter-end goals. So you could imagine an example that a public company is committed to a certain shipment goal at the end of say Q4, and then they may want to be aggressive with their transceiver cost. So because they really want to meet their target. That's just an example, but that does happen because every company has a different drivers. Third one, I call it business priorities and strategy. The example I can give you is, again, maybe that's a slightly different than financial target. So this is more of a long-term strategy. As an example, manufacturer can introduce a brand new product, and might be one of the first companies who introduced this state-of-the-art transceiver. And while the cost is, I'll just pick an example. Actual cost might be, let's say, $100, but the company may decide that they want to really gain their market share by being very, very aggressive. So they may just cost it like $95. So initially they might sell it at a loss, realizing that once the volume hits, they can quickly bring down the cost quickly and turn into the profit. So initially they may lose some money, but realizing that in the next 3, 6, or 9 months, they're going to gain market share very quickly, and more customers starting to use the product. Hence, then it becomes a win-win situation. Typically, you could kind of see this kind of a strategy, especially when there is a shift in the main data rate, right? So when customers move from, say, 40 to 100 gig or 100 gig to 400 gig, clearly many customers will do trade-off analysis. There's a lot of different factors in that, but like a simplistic way is that 100 gig to 400 gig, okay, that's 4 times bandwidth, but do I really want to pay 4 times cost, right? Most companies probably don't. So maybe that some companies may decide that while the initially 400 gig transceiver cost might be too high, or it's very high, but they may want to be very aggressive in their costing strategy or pricing strategy, and so that way there's more demand for 400 gig, and then eventually that increases the whole business volume and also drive down the cost, right? And another important factor, and that's also true with company like us, is a customer. So in B2B business, clearly the purchase volume makes a big difference. We'll definitely give a preferred pricing to, say, repeat customer who buys, say, 500 pieces a quarter, versus a customer who may just need 10 pieces as a one-off order, right? So clearly there's a purchase volume, and repeat customer relationship is very important. And again, because of their business priorities and relationship, all of that come into play. So it's not such a maybe quite, I guess, qualitative, but relationship matters, and that we definitely had the cases where when we went through some difficult time, our vendors helped out, and also when our customers had some issues, we really tried to help out the customer. So I think that's part of a business relationship that everybody probably had some experience, if you're in the business long enough. But the other important factor is I mean, while the transceivers are, all of them now is based on the multi-sourcing agreement, but there are customers who want some type of a customization, right? It could be quite straightforward, like labeling. Some customers may want their own labels, EEPROM programming, maybe then packaging. They may want to be some little different. So that's a little bit more common. But we also had the customers who actually want different technical parameters. So typically, what that involves is that we may have to do cherry picking of components. So we had a customer who was in the who's in the broadcasting industry, and they had a certain margin they wanted to keep, even though they were moving to higher data rate. So that at the end of the day, that really involved cherry picking the components so that they can have a much higher margin than usual what's expected in the standard product. Yeah. So that obviously gets more expensive. I thought it would be fun to show you some examples. So as many of you know, that transceivers typically go out into a tray, about 10 trays or 8 trays. But this particular customer at the left side, we do have a customer who actually requests individual piece packaging. So this has each one tray, it has each one ESD form, has each one box, and each box even have this instruction paper. So I mean, frankly, as a ex-engineer perspective, I think this is a way overkill. But I mean, this particular customer is in their own, in their industry. I think that's how their customers expect it, and they want to really provide good the presentation and professional packaging. So I mean, it's so that's what customers request. But clearly, this type of a packaging costs a lot more money than standard packaging, right? So this is like ESD packaging, things like that. So this is some examples of the customization. Okay. Last factor I want to mention is what I call external environment. I just mentioned component supply. So I mean, clearly this COVID thing had some. Nobody expected this kind of a worldwide pandemic, but clearly we are living through it. So it does have an impact on supply, and even before the COVID. Like if you recall, a few years ago, there was that big earthquake, tsunami in Japan, and a lot of, especially the laser chips, come from large Japanese companies like Mitsubishi or Sumitomo. So that had some impact. When that happened, there was an impact on the component supply and quite of a concern how stable the laser chip supply can be when there was a big disruption in Japan. So a lot of these things are obviously beyond our control, but all of us try to mitigate these kind of a risk by having, second source or having some contingency plans. But at least from my personal perspective, it's unfortunately happening more often. So I think that all of us just have to prepare, at least have a mindset, have some contingency plans. Clearly, the demand has a big role in pricing, just based on the basic supply and demand. Another factor is because of a recent trade dispute especially between the U.S. and China. That used to be there were hardly any tariffs on optical components, but some of the transceivers, I think it's about 7.5% coming from mainland China. But some of the fiber optic cables, depending on how they're categorized, I think they can be as high as 20% or 25%. So that has a huge impact on cost. So that's that added definitely more uncertainty to the overall industry, but that's a reality. So we have to deal with it. So that also there's a freight aspect because a lot of the factories, as you know, is now based in Asia. So especially for customers and for company like us based in the US, there's a freight tariff that we have to think about. So all of that come into play. Okay. So I want to give you actual cost examples. So while I cannot give you the one number, and this is actual some numbers we looked at from earlier part of this year, from January through September. So like 100 gig SR4, our price ranged from like $200 to almost $220 to almost $300. Again, that's depending on customer volume, and some customers have some extra requests, so that there's a range. For CWDM4, it ranged from about 380 to 420, roughly around there. And 100 gig LR4, which covers 10 kilometers, it was range was from our company, it was about $700 to $850. Okay? And 100 gig ER4 Lite, which actually covers, depending on the fact presence or not, 30 kilometer, 40 kilometer, but the ER4 Lite price ranged from so almost basically around $3,000 because it's still it's a very expensive component, and it's been a very small demand from some of the few customers. So I think this will just give you some ideas of the pricing of various 100 gig optical modules. So these are some pointers from our perspective. I'm just stating the obvious in the first bullet, but clearly the price varies from different manufacturers, even for the so-called same optical transceiver. I mean, let's face it, you can now Google it, and like companies like fs.com has their all the their optical transceiver prices on the website. So I mean, I think it's, that it's no news that there's a lot of different prices. And as I mentioned, because of these different factors and business considerations, price, oops, sorry about that. Price also can vary even from the same company because of these different factors. So we really believe that well-informed customer is a happy and the best customer. Our advice to you is that every customer and everyone has a different values. So you definitely need to understand what you value the most. And you can learn more about your optical module suppliers and partners. So cost is absolutely important, the technical aspects, the R&D, what they're doing in terms of testing qualifications, that's important. The manufacturing, quality control, that's important. And of course, everybody care about the lead time, stock, that's important. And some of these high technology product, high-tech products, you can have a lot of technical issues. So, local support, technical support, customer support, all of them are important. But just like everything, I think that you want to prioritize what's important for your business, and then just make an informed decision for optical transceivers and as well as other products. Okay, that's so hopefully that gives you some ideas of at least what goes on in terms of costing these optical modules, and I'll also give you some examples. And so I'll be happy to take questions. Let's see. Yeah, so something in there. Okay, there's a question about the does this apply to other form factors as well as AOCs? Yes, I mean all the factors we just mentioned is I think that they apply to a lot of different all across the board. But I know that some of the AOCs or fiber cables may actually have a different tariff. I don't know exactly what category, but I've seen some of the fiber optic product category now gets duty of as high as 20% or 25%. that's going to make some significant impact on the cost. Right? But generally, the factors I think are similar. The considerations that goes into costing products. Okay. All right. Good. Very good. Okay. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you find this useful. All right.